When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast. Thank you for tuning into episode 24 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snelling's Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. Our guest today is founder and CEO of DMX Consulting, Dee Maddox. Dee considers herself a performance expert and specializes in professional development training, facilitation, and coaching. She has more than 25 years' experience in human resources and government compliance, including serving as the human capital team lead for the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center during the 2010 Space Shuttle Program retirement. She holds an MBA with specialization in human resources management from George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, the home of Dreamland Barbecue. Dee is also a married mother of two and loves serving the community. Dee, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. We always do.
Okay.
Tell us where you were born and how you grew up.
Oh, good question. So you already said home of Dreamland Barbecue. So UAB, go Blazers. I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and I stayed home and went to the University of Alabama, Birmingham. So my high school in Birmingham is a historic building on the historic preservation, Ramsey High School. So I graduated from Ramsey High School, stayed home and went to UAB, but I lived on campus and majored in business and graduated with a specialization in HR, met my husband there, and we got married 6 months after I graduated, and that was 25 years ago. So married mother of two, high school graduate, Frisco high grad of class of 2023. And my daughter is a senior at Oklahoma State University. Go Pokes. So I got a lot going on. Married for 25 years and two young adult children.
That's a lot. That is a lot on your plate.
It's a lot, Scott.
All right, so let's go back to growing up in Birmingham. Tell me about that.
So Birmingham, I like to affectionately refer to it as the deep fried South because
yes,
you can get almost anything fried, I think.
It's like its very own Texas State Fair, except it's 365 days a year, right?
Yes, it's a lifestyle, not just a seasonal event. So I don't cook, but I fry. So people say, do you cook? Nope. But I can fry. Like I can fry chicken, I can fry pork chops. Like I can fry just about anything you want. But I don't think that qualifies as cooking because there's no recipe involved. But two-parent household, my mom and dad actually just relocated to Texas from Birmingham, Alabama, about 3 weeks ago. So blue-collar workers. My mom worked for the county, Jefferson County is where I'm from. And then my dad worked for the phone company. And so he was a part of the Big Bell breakup and buyout. And I have one brother who went to the Navy, even though my dad is an Army vet.
Oh,
so
how did
Army
that go
versus
over?
Navy, right? But, so my dad's he's a pretty reasonable guy. I think the main thing for him was service. So he didn't balk at my brother's choice of the Navy. And then funny story, my husband's Navy also. So
there you go.
Just keeps getting better. So Army versus Navy there. But yeah, so I loved learning. So education was sort of like, I was one of those weird kids who got perfect attendance year after year because I hated missing school. So I was a really good student. That's kind of what I had going for me, but not, cheer wasn't considered to be a sport like it is now, super competitive. Back then it was just fun. So I did cheer in high school and went on to college and pledged a sorority. And I was one of those sorority girls. I was undergraduate sorority president and sort of just energetic, loving life and loving to learn and a great big family. I have a big family of aunts and uncles and cousins that are still in Birmingham. That's
fantastic. And Birmingham is one of my favorite cities. When we talked before the show, we were talking about how I got to spend quite a bit of time in Birmingham at my previous job back in the day, right out of law school, doing products liability defense work. We had several cases that were in Birmingham. And that was kind of a central place for everybody to go do vehicle inspections. And so I'm very familiar with the food scene in Birmingham and Dreamland Barbecue. If you have not been to Dreamland Barbecue, if you are ever in Birmingham, go. You will not be disappointed. It's fantastic.
So Dreamland, the original Dreamland is in Tuscaloosa. We're the university. So in Alabama, we feel about the University of Alabama the way some folks feel about the University of Texas. So UAB, a satellite of the University of Alabama, is where the original Dreamland is in Tuscaloosa. But the Iron Bowl used to be held in Birmingham, and Dreamland found it profitable to make a second location outside of their original Dreamland in Birmingham, and everybody loves it, even though Alabama has their own stadium now.
There you go. And so if you're in Tuscaloosa, definitely visit
Or Birmingham.
Dreamland. Or Birmingham, absolutely. Yeah. So what made you decide to major in business? Out of all of the possible choices, why business?
So I didn't choose business. Business chose me. I started out as a computer science major because my dad, we mentioned him before, he knew something the rest of us didn't know. So I'm going to go ahead and age myself. 30 years ago, he said computers are the wave of the future, and you should definitely be a computer science major. So it was his idea that instead of going into education, I told you I loved learning, I loved school, and I thought that I was going to be my second grade teacher, Miss Hamill. I loved her. I worshipped her. Well, when I got ready to choose my major and I said to him, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to major in education. He was like, no, computers. That's where the money's going to be. Now, we're going to pretend he wasn't right.
Just don't let him listen to this episode.
I hope he doesn't hear this, that computers indeed were the wave of the future. So I started as a computer science major with a business minor because I thought it was just a safe minor to have with the computer science course load. However, now that you know a little bit about me, programming was not my thing. And I attempted miserably for longer than I should have computer science as a major until a guy who I didn't even know at the time questioned my choice and said that I should probably consider something else as a major. And after I was done being offended by his recommendation, I did indeed change my major to business and kept computer science as my minor, finished my degree, and then married the guy 6 months later.
Oh, but that's there you go.
No, yeah, that happened.
That is a pretty funny intro story to Scott. I don't really think that you should be doing this. You're not very good at that.
I wasn't, and I was in denial. I wasn't passing my classes, and I won't say casually, he says immediately, if you're not passing with flying colors your major, you might be in trouble. He was like, why would you struggle in your major if that's what you want to do with the rest of your life? And so often these days, post-pandemic, people are talking about purpose and passion. If you're good at something, you're going to be naturally good at it. And if you're planning on devoting your life to it, it shouldn't be a struggle. And I was struggling.
I had a bit of the same experience. It was not a future spouse, but I had someone look at my biology papers and tell me, this is not the right field for you. You're not going to be a doctor. It was my professor, but he was right. And so sometimes it just takes somebody giving you that hard truth.
Hard truth. That's a good way of putting it.
To allow you out of that cycle, right? I mean, I'd always dreamed of being a doctor, and to have someone in authority tell me, like, this is not right for you.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we just need that, right? We need somebody to tell us, hey, I know you may want this, or you think you want this.
You think you want it.
But if you're not good at it, you're going to be miserable, even if you were able to pass the classes and somehow get into medical school.
Exactly. And the point that you bring up there, someone in authority. So before social media, the people who most influenced us were neighbors and clergy and parents.
Right.
So to have my dad say, he's a solid guy, this is what I think you should do with the rest of your life, that for me was a figure of authority. To have him say computers are the way. And he was on the beginning stages of computers because they had those large mainframes. The phone company was sort of going an early adopter technology-wise. So he had some insight based on his day-to-day. And, that's what we do as parents. We want the best for our kids. So, I guess maybe he knows. He was right.
It's funny you say that because as parents, you want the best for your kids. Mm-hmm. And we may know what's coming in the future, and we may try to push them in a certain direction, but it's not them. Right. And I think as parents, we have to be really careful there. Tell me how you avoided doing that, or did you fall into that trap too? I'll catch myself, or my wife will catch me doing it. She'll be like, hey, I know that you would love it if they did this, but let's let them kind of go their own course. My wife's really good about it.
So I think what you're saying is exactly what we do. We either go whole hog, to put it in Alabama terms, and pushing them in a particular direction, or we take the polar opposite approach. So I decided, because he chose my school and he chose my major, that I would not do that for either of my kids. I would not choose their major, and I would not select the school for them. So I had wanted to go to the University of Alabama, and he had said, it's a perfectly good state school and it's cheaper. You'll get a fine education. He's so practical. Funny story.
Right.
So when I moved here from Huntsville, Alabama to Texas 12 years ago. And that's when I started to get my Southwestern school education, because I came from the SEC. Right. So I didn't really know the status, or I won't even say, I didn't know there were so many passionate people in the Southwest region about sports and schools as there are in the SEC.
Right.
So when my daughter said she was going to go to the University of Houston, we'd already gotten literature from Alabama, which was, of course, my dream. I gently said, "Don't you want a tour? We're going to see your grandparents. On the way there, do you want to stop in Tuscaloosa?" Nope. And so
just stomped on your heart right there.
Stomped on my heart, but I held strong, and I said, "Okay, I think you should probably see it before you decide so quickly. I don't want to go to school in Alabama." So she was very adamant very quickly that it wasn't going to be a part of her trajectory. So I decided to let her apply to wherever she wanted to, and wherever she could get in, and whatever she chose was what we were going to support and let her do.
All right. So you clearly are not a computer science major. What happens next?
I changed to business, because the way speaking of passion and purpose and things that come to you easily, I was getting A's in the business courses that were my minor. So it was a smooth transition to change business to my major, and then keep the computer science courses that I had attempted to fulfill my minor requirements. Okay. So it was pretty smooth in that end, that I was good at the business stuff. So I switched to business, and then specialized in human resources, and then later did my MBA with a specialization in human resources, and landed a job as I was finishing my undergraduate degree. I was working full-time through school, and the position for HR supervisor became open. And at the time I was working third shift for United States Postal Service. And the manager said, "I'm going to give you a shot. The other people who are applying for this HR job want it because it's day shift, but I know that you're working and going to school, and if I remember correctly, your major is HR." And so that opportunity was just something God placed in my path. I had nothing to do with it. Jim Corkin didn't have to choose me, but he did. And so my first role, as I was finishing up with the business degree specializing in HR, was supervisor of human resources at the United States Postal Service in Birmingham.
It's amazing. It seems like most guests have some part of their story where unexpected opportunity or career path or something happens, and it completely changes the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah, completely.
Okay, so you take that opportunity, and what drew you to human resources? I mean, obviously there's tons of different focuses in business. What drew you to human resources?
So at the time, it was a fairly newly identified profession in track. Had been referred to casually in the business arena as personnel, but just from my own studying and training as an HR professional, in order to be considered a profession like yours, a lawyer or a doctor, you have to have a code of ethics. You have to have a body of research. You have to have a certifying national organization membership, and a specific body of knowledge that governs the industry. And HR was developing that at the time. I already knew I liked people, and someone told me, "Hey, have you heard about," and I wasn't as familiar with it being called human resources as when you were getting jobs in the old days, it would go to personnel, but it was being formed as a profession. Society of Human Resource Management was formalizing it, and the code of ethics existed, even certification. So I thought, okay, I like people. That sounds interesting, and I'm going to go for it.
And so after your job at the post office, how did that go? Did you find was it pretty easy for you to step into, especially at a government position like that?
So as a young 20-something stepping into a role that deals with a lot of compliance, in order to have a federal role, there are lots of things that you have to have.
Right.
The government doesn't do sponsorships and those kinds of things, and then you can't have gaps in service. They want to make sure you weren't institutionalized or incarcerated. So just going through the eligibility phase of getting a person onboarding, as we say these days, is pretty strenuous. In the old days, it wasn't as automatic and automated online. A lot of self-service happens now. In the old days, it had to be accomplished by a person who had access to that type of information. So the transition going in was easy because I was computer savvy in terms of getting the information entered, but I liked people, and both of those things were required. So the transition was smooth.
All right. So you mentioned, kind of going back here a little bit, you were president of your sorority in college. So you have some leadership chops, right? I mean, that's an elected position by your sorority, I would assume. And moving into this supervisory position for the United States Post Office at a mid-20s, kind of mid to late 20s role, that's a lot. And I assume you're dealing with people who have been there for decades.
Yes.
What was it that allowed you to come into that position as a leadership, or I guess from a leadership perspective, and succeed?
At this point, my husband also worked for the Postal Service, and he said, these folks know their job. And the thing that you can do for yourself that will make your life a lot easier is let them do what they're good at. And that, I think, is something we can apply today. If we find out, when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, what someone is good at, and then let them do it. So he said to me, don't go in trying to boss them. They know their job. Don't try to boss them for the sake of bossing when operations is your main function, to keep the operations going, to keep the number of people in place doing the work that needs to be done, mail processing. So removing that desire that a young supervisor might have to let you know that I'm in charge and trying to tell you how to do what you already know how to do. And that, I think, also shaped me into going towards performance management, and why I feel so equipped to sort of focus on that, because that, I think, is the thing that plagues organizations today. We have people who are strong in some places and weak in others, and when we find them in the wrong role, we should do what Disney calls recasting, find a role that they're better suited for, but oftentimes it's our first inkling to manage them out of the organization, unfortunately.
What a great insight. Right people, right seat, right?
Yes.
As Jim Collins would say.
Yes.
But I think that's so hard, because I think a lot of people in leadership say, okay, here's the position. And you're good at 3 of the 4 things, but you're really bad at that 4th one. And so, here's the ceiling for you. We got to get you out of this seat, so bye. Okay, well, how about using a little creativity and figure out, well, how do we get them into a role where they're doing the 3 things that they're really good at and take that 4th one away from them?
Exactly.
And I think doing that is difficult because it's not something that's been done before necessarily. And we all know one of the hardest things in an organization, and when you're trying to implement change, is new stuff, right?
Yes.
Because it's a pain, because people don't want to necessarily have to take the time to train on it, or it's just not what they know.
Right.
And the vast majority of people want to stick with what they know, even if it's not as good as it could be.
Exactly. So, yeah. So what you're talking about is the other side to what I do, change management. Changes are necessary to be the most effective, and you can't stop change from happening. So managing it effectively is all you can do. Control the controllables. So in your scenario, being good at those 3 and removing the 4th, that's 25% of your job role. We often talk about the 80-20, so you're probably not doing all of the things all of the time. And if it's something that comprises a small part, why not just remove it altogether? So I know you're familiar with David Clifton and Strengths Finders.
Right.
So focusing on your strengths and not focusing on the weaknesses. And if you were going to delegate something, I would recommend you delegate or give away the task that you don't do well, the task that you don't enjoy, and the task that you could pay someone to do better.
Yeah, you're combining all my favorite books now. You got Good to Great. You have Strength Finders. You have all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah.
Who Not How. That's the one I was trying to think of. That's one of my favorite books. All right, so you have an interesting title for the other part of your job. You said it was a change.
So change management.
Okay.
I like to refer
this.
to Jeremy Spencer. Is it Jason Spencer? Last name Spencer, that part's for sure. But it's Who Moved My Cheese. It's an old change management book that just talks about the things you can control and the things you can and how you respond. I mean, change happens and you have to adjust, you have to monitor, and then just change, because it's going to happen whether you do or not. You can be change resistant. You talk about silent resistors to change and those who are on board and stakeholders and advocates. But guess what? The change is going to happen. I mean, we know that just because of how technology has impacted our lives and changed so many things.
Okay, I want to dive down into this because I think this is really interesting. So a company needs a big change.
Yes.
What's the first thing you have to do?
Communicate.
Communicate. Okay.
Communicate. Communication is the foundation of any successful change. If you can communicate why you're changing, how it's going to impact the people, and keep the doors of communication open the entire time you're changing so that they know what's happening. Because if you don't keep the communication doors open, people will create their own narrative. And that's where those resistors come from. When they don't know what's happening. And if they don't know what's happening and they make it up, then they possibly are going to, of course, as you do, make up the wrong story.
So how much, or I guess how important is framing in terms of introducing this change to the team or to the management or whomever?
So when you say framing, that's another part of the communication, the why behind how it's going to impact the individual and the organization overall. That is critically important, that you frame the necessity, because no one wants to think you're changing just because then it feels painful and negative if you're impacting me and there's no reason behind it. So framing it, the reason why and the outcome of, is it going to impact my job? Is it going to impact my pay? Is it going to impact my schedule? People want to know why we're changing and how it impacts them. So the framing is critical.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see at that stage?
During the framing,
Yes.
withholding information. Withholding critical pieces of information because you don't have the final answers. If you don't know what the long-term outcome is going to be, it's better to say, I don't know, than to not talk about it. So I think lack of information and failure to communicate or willingness to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers. I know we're going to change and I haven't figured out the entire thing yet, but it's going to happen. That's better than, well, let's wait until we figure it out and we have all the ducks in a row and they have already heard that you're interviewing movers and you're looking for a new space. Now they're wondering, well, am I going to the new space? Why didn't they tell us?
Right. How would you approach a situation where leaders have attempted to implement change and it went terribly? And so there's already this fear of change. Either the change was horribly communicated,
Yes.
or, as I'm sure a lot of times happens, they have an idea, they go to start to implement it, and then it just kind of goes away, right? They never follow through or completely finish it. You step into a situation where you have that history, what do you do?
When there's a history of change gone wrong, and most change implementation efforts, by the way, more than 50% of them fail, and it is because of the communication piece, all you can do is adjust and try again. So if the last time you tried the change and you didn't communicate, stop, draft a communication plan, identify some key stakeholders, and make it their sole responsibility to keep everyone informed along the way. So there's something, I think, on one of the social media outlets that says, I know that's what happened for you, but I'm hoping for a different outcome
Right.
this time. So I know we've had some change situations in the past that didn't go as planned, but this time we're going to involve you and keep you informed. So involvement and information are going to be critical.
Okay. So say you nail the communication piece. Everything's going great. What are the other pitfalls that people will fall into?
Beyond the communication piece, the other pitfalls associated with it is not the advocacy and the involvement. So just telling me that you're going to change is one thing, but how you're going to change the operations or the things that I'm responsible for, I'm the best person to tell you how to do that successfully. So identifying advocates and stakeholders that know how to move you forward to the change is going to make it easier than keeping them out and trying to make decisions in their wheelhouse.
Oh, okay. Love it. Okay, so what happens after you go to the post office?
We moved from Birmingham, Alabama to Washington, D.C., where
right.
postal headquarters is located, and I'm able to move as a trailing spouse because my husband's postal also.
Gotcha.
And I managed to keep my role, and I stay in human resources, but now I'm not in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm in Washington, D.C.
Pretty different area.
Pretty different area. It was very different. It was vastly different than how I grew up because most people go away to school and then return to home. I'd only been at home. So Washington, D.C. was my first away.
Wow, that's a pretty big away right there. How did you adjust?
Well, once I stopped waving at strangers and getting crazy looks by saying good morning, because D.C. was a different environment. In the South, you say good morning to everyone, whether you know them or not, and you wave hello if you see them facing you. A different environment in that they're not as friendly. Strangers don't talk to strangers. There's mass transportation, so many differences.
Right.
So the adjustment was huge. So I was taking public transportation. It was just, thinking back, it was a great experience. And I think that everyone should do it once. Like if you've never been to DC or if you're in a small town and you've never gone to a big city and taken public transportation, it's fun and exciting and you get the hang of it and then it's part of your everyday.
Right. I remember the very first time I took the subway in DC and I remember going back up the escalator and I looked from the ground floor all the way up to where the top of it was. And it freaked me out a little bit. It is way down there.
Yeah. The incline, as you're looking up and you're looking behind you, it's so steep. It feels like the flyover is here.
Right.
You're like, am I at the top of a building and I'm driving my car? That's what I felt when I moved to Texas. The flyovers were so high.
Right.
The first time I was on the metro and I rode, I was on the Virginia side. So DC, Maryland, Virginia. We lived in Alexandria, Virginia. The platforms can be so far underground. When you're riding, you're going up.
Right.
It's really, really deep. And the other part is you have to move to the right to allow people who want to walk the escalator, who are always in a hurry, to one side. I had to learn that too.
Yeah, you'll get bumped out of the way real quick there. All right.
Yes.
So when you finished your tenure with the post office, what happens next?
I quit the post office for a short time and did some DoD consulting. So Department of Defense, of course, in Washington, D.C. is huge. You hear about contractors and consultants, i.e. what I'm doing now, and you realize that there's a whole different side of the coin. You can be on the government side or you can be on the contract side, which happens to be very lucrative because contractors are actually getting paid with government funds. So I was lured away by a small consulting firm that was started by a couple of Booz Allen Hamilton principals who broke away from the big house consulting firm to start their own thing and needed someone who had government insight into how to secure government personnel. And I had that.
You became a part of Washington.
I did. I was a part of the machine.
That's funny. All right. So you did that for a little bit, and then I'm guessing you went back to the post office?
I decided to go to graduate school while I was there because all my family was back home and I had lots of time on my hand and I always loved to learn. And I got enrolled at George Washington and did my master's at George Washington with a specialization. So I did the entire MBA program and then I started the specialization program, which is equivalent to a second master's, before my husband said that's enough. And
no more school
no
for
more
you.
school for you. So I had an MBA with a specialization in HR. And I finished, and then I found myself blessed with McKinsey.
Okay. And your first child.
Yes, right out of grad school.
Okay. So you not only got an MBA, but you got a specialization in a specific area of HR.
Yes.
Okay. So what was your goal? What were you trying to accomplish? Were you just looking for a degree and something that you enjoyed, or did you have a master plan?
I was going to rule the world of human resources. I was going to be the VP of HR somewhere for somebody, and I was going to get as many credentials and as much education as possible. So prior to getting the MBA, I had actually started to certify. So Society of Human Resource Management offers HR certification. So I had done the first level of certification, PHR, professional in HR, because so I said, I'll have an MBA, PHR, and I'll be the VP of HR. Like that was my big plan.
All right. And at what point did that plan kind of go sideways on you and you decided to go a different route?
When I got pregnant with McKinsey, I thought, okay, she needs me. I'm never working again.
And your husband's over here like, hey, wait, hold on. No. We just got these 2 degrees for you. You're on your way to all these certifications. This is fantastic.
Have you talked to him? Because
no,
that
I
sounds
haven't.
like the conversation.
All right. So then all of a sudden, hey, you know what? I like being a stay-at-home mom.
Yep.
And how long did you do that for?
Ooh, I think I lasted just at 2 years.
Okay.
And so.
And then you had the bug, the itch.
Then I had the itch. It feels sheepish to say because I know that being a full-time mom is a noble profession, and please believe it is a job, but it's not for everyone. Since I had worked my way through college and I'd had part-time jobs in high school, working was a part of my fiber. And as much as I wanted to be happy and comfortable being a full-time mom, it wasn't for me.
So my wife is a full-time mom, and during COVID, when we were working from home, I gained a completely, I always appreciated her, but it was a completely new appreciation for my wife at that point in time. And I realized that she truly is a saint.
Oh, yeah.
Now I can't let her listen to this episode, just like you can't let your dad listen to it. But yeah, being a full-time stay-at-home mom that's a job and then some.
It is. It really is. It is full-time work. It's just working in the home instead of working outside of the home, but it is nonstop.
No 8 to 5 there.
There's no 8 to 5. The hours are endless.
All right. So you get this itch, and then what's the next step?
I decide that I'm going to start looking for work. And I think what I decided before then is that I needed my family, and I wanted to relocate from DC back to the South so my parents could be involved, because family is huge for me. It's one of the things that drives me and that I feel the most passionate about is family first. And now we have this baby, and I wanted my parents I wanted her to have the richness that I had, having a great, big, crazy, happy family to help raise her. So I asked my husband if we could get something closer to home, and we relocated to Atlanta, which is only 2 hours from Birmingham. So that was much closer than DC.
Significantly closer.
Significantly closer.
Just as bad traffic.
Yes. So you know a lot about a lot, because the traffic in Atlanta was like the commute from Dallas to Frisco. Like, it's pretty horrible.
Yeah. I showed up for a deposition in Atlanta one time, and I get in the taxi, and he's like, "Where are you headed?" And I told him, I was like, "Are we going to be there by 2?" He laughed at me. And so I called the law firm that I was supposed to be at and told him, "Hey, it looks like I'm running late." He's like, "Oh, nothing ever starts here, at least an hour late." So I was good to go. But yeah, I learned very quickly about Atlanta traffic.
Oh yeah, it's major. It's more big city, more people, more congestion, more cars on the road, and I don't even know if rush hour ever ends. Like, I don't, like, here you can say, like, maybe you get on the road after 9 or close to 10, and then again, like, after 1:30, after 6. I cannot identify a time for you in Atlanta where I can say that's the perfect time to try to go and get to where you're going in a reasonable time.
I couldn't do it. My head would explode.
Oh yeah, it was.
So you get a job in Atlanta, or you guys moved to Atlanta. What are you doing in Atlanta?
In Atlanta, I worked for the Department of Transportation in Human Resources. So more onboarding.
You love the government.
Yes. So prior to starting DMX Consulting, that's literally all I did. I did the DoD stint, which is a cheat because it was DoD doing government consulting.
Right.
So even still, I was never private corporation, interestingly enough. But I was with the Department of Transportation, still working on boarding, recruitment, selection. We had a training program, not too off of what I'm doing with the D to Success, because it was called Highway to Success. We taught people how to search for jobs that fit their skills. Again, more of working towards your strengths.
Okay. Going back to the Strength Finder, are you in agreement that it is much better to focus on increasing your strengths as opposed to improving your weaknesses? I
do agree. I don't think you can ignore them because they balance who we are. So if I were to tell you that one of my top 5 strengths is harmony, harmony is great because I'm going to be a great people person. I'm going to be a great mediator. However, the flip side, if you read that, and I know you have, it's conflict avoidance. Mm-hmm. And when you're managing conflict and you're managing change, and conflict comes with the change, conflict avoidance is not a tool of effectiveness because you're not having conversations that need to be had to address situations that are right in front of you. You're looking for a way out, or you're not looking at all because you just don't want to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. All right. So at what point do you say, you know what, I want to do the entrepreneur thing. I want to start my own gig?
Pandemic.
Okay.
We were returning from spring break, March of 20. We're at DFW and we're on our phones, and all this news is, we'd heard about it prior to landing.
Right.
And working from home, kids are home, we're home, and thinking about, speaking of traffic, my commute from Dallas to Frisco, and the job that I had prior to starting the company wasn't human resources, which I think I've told you passionately was where I wanted to be.
Right.
I had taken what I thought was going to be a temporary role as an analyst, and that temporary had turned into 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Because I had focused on what was happening with the kids and what was happening with Frisco and what was happening with my husband and my family. I wasn't really thinking I'm in a role that doesn't allow me to do what I love, because the role paid well and it provided a tremendous amount of flexibility for me to be available to my family.
And I think that's a role that a lot of people find themselves in, right? They have a family. That's their number one priority, as it should be. And so they end up having to find a position or even a career that allows them that flexibility and the ability to provide for their family, even though that might not be the best use of their strengths, or they just may not even like it whatsoever.
Right.
And so tell me, at what point, I guess, did you say, hey, look, all right, I've done this for long enough. Clearly, I've done it for 10 years. What was the driver for you to say, okay, I'm done?
Well, during the working from home, so, first we thought it was going to be a couple of weeks and then it was months. So about 6 months in of doing my job from home, so not commuting to work, so there's no commute. I'm working upstairs. So I'm walking upstairs, getting in front of the laptop, I'm Zooming in Teams, everything is online. And I realize now I don't have this horrible drive, but I realize that I don't even like just logging on because I prefer people to my laptop. And I was not completely aware that I had built for myself a set of circumstances to mask my true job responsibilities.
Tell me what you mean by that.
So as an analyst, I was working on my laptop directly with data reports and those kinds of things. But if you're in an office setting and you're a people person, you have the proverbial water cooler.
Right.
I had people when I was commuting. During the work from home phase, all I had was my actual work and no people. And it was during that time that I realized, oh, this is my job, this laptop, where are the people? Because I was always volunteering for assignments and committees and extra work that gave me people. Then having just the laptop, I realized this was my job, and minus the commute, which I didn't enjoy at all, and doing just the core components of my work, which was analysis and reporting and briefs and giving concrete information for large-scale decisions for the region. I realized that wasn't how I wanted to spend the rest of my life, and it wasn't what I enjoyed the most, and it wasn't what people came to me for.
Not your superpower.
Not my superpower. People were always asking me questions about how to write something or how to do a cover letter, how to do a recommendation. People were always asking me HR types of things. And I was actually doing the same thing at work because our HR was decentralized. So I was even filling that role in addition to my analytical role when I had people.
So you realize this is your job, not your superpower. What comes next? Is that when you start DMX Consulting?
That's when I start thinking about it.
Okay.
That's when I start strategizing, like, if I did something different, what would that be? And part of the story is going from Birmingham to Atlanta. We left Atlanta and went to Huntsville, where I worked for NASA. When you read my bio, you said I worked for Space Shuttle retirement during 2010, the Bush presidency. Mandated that the space shuttle program in its current form be retired.
Right.
So I was a large part of that human capital effort. Going from Huntsville to Dallas and having been here for 10 years and then realizing I've done a lot of things that I loved on the people side and that the part of my current job that I loved wasn't actually my job.
Difficult position to be in.
So I decided, they say having a seat at the table, I decided to build the table because we know that in most professions, people want to know what have you done lately?
Right.
The what's in it for me. And realistically, I have been out of the profession for a full 10 years.
And so as you walk me through the process of, you said that I started thinking about if I were to do something different, what would that look like? Mm-hmm. Break that down. What was your mindset there, and how did you go through that process to figure out, okay, yeah, this is kind of what would be perfect for me?
Talking to friends, lots of reading, and prayer, because I'm talking about doing something different than my family is used to me doing. It's going to require support. It's going to require resources. But I also know a lot of people who are doing lots of things. So I knew some people who had left corporate jobs and gone into entrepreneurship for corporations. They'd left big companies that we all know and love and started their own thing. So I knew it was possible. And then I thought about, from an HR perspective, when I would review candidates, I wanted to know what had they done lately, what are their metrics, what are their accomplishments in that field.
Right.
I didn't have any, what have you done for me lately, major metrics that would make me be the best candidate for any of the roles that I thought that I could do.
Okay. And so what was it that pushed you to say, okay, I am doing this? What was your jump-off point?
My jump-off point was when I mentioned it to my husband, and a lot of people were saying, the return to work started to be like a discussion. I said, I don't think I want to go back. And so he says, well, are you going to find something in Frisco? And I said, well, I remember now the way that I got into this role. I got into the analyst role because when I moved to Texas, a lot of the HR roles were highly competitive. And I didn't have some of the things that they were looking for in regards to Spanish speaking to be able to communicate with employees from all walks of life. There's a large Spanish speaking component here for some of the roles I was looking at years ago. And then having had a higher level role because I had relocated multiple times following my husband's career. So I had been moving sideways in my career, but collecting lots of valuable experiences, but not holding those concrete titles that people look for when they want to put you in charge of something. And I thought, well, all of those things are what people hire people to do. And I actually have the unique ability of doing those things and knowing something about them myself. So rather than waiting to say, well, I'll try to take a role in one of these areas that I have experience in, I'll create my own. And so I read a book called The Story Brand and started realizing that if you're going to have a company, the name has to be meaningful. Do something that you love. Do something that you're good at. And so that's where I came up with the idea of DMX, of course, my initials, and then coming up with the excellence piece, which is something that as a kid who loved school and A means excellent. It just all fell in when I started thinking about what I believe, why I do what I do, what makes me tick. DMX Consulting, where we demand excellence and achieve success.
And Story Brand, fantastic book for anyone who has a business, looking to start a business. Is that Donald Miller? Is that right?
I think you're right. Don't quote me.
Great book. All right. So it's exciting to start a business.
It is.
You've thought through it all clearly. You've done your research. You jump off. What's the first thing that smacks you in the face that you didn't think about?
For-profit corporations are very different than government entities.
Indeed.
For-profit is always about the bottom line, and they're early adopters and innovators. Government is not the first to the table, and that is where my experience was mostly. So it's kind of going from being a house pet to a wild animal, honestly. Like I was taken care of before, and now I find myself in the wild. I've got to hunt in order to eat. So that was the first thing. I can't just sit around and wait for, in the spirit of Who Moved My Cheese, I can't sit around and wait for it to show up again. I got to go get it. So that is what smacked me in the face, that if you don't have a clientele base, if you don't know how and make relationships with people work with people they know, like, and trust. And if you don't have those type of relationships or collaborations or connections, then you'll have a difficult time eating if you're hunting.
Boy, and isn't that the truth? It's amazing, whenever you start telling friends and family, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business, everybody is so encouraging, or the vast majority, I hope everybody is so encouraging. And you have this amazing momentum, and then you go out and you start, you're like, okay, I have all this support, but I have zero business.
Yes.
It's not because they wouldn't give you their business, it's that they don't have business to give you. And so realizing that and being like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to start paying vendors. I'm going to have to start paying this. I'm going to have to, I'd like to eat.
Yes.
You got to go hunt, and you got to figure out, it's not just about the effort. It's about having success with the effort. Anybody can go out there and try to sell and try to make relationships, but you got to be able to do it well in order to be successful. So how did you figure out how to do that?
Well, I didn't realize it at the time, but I had already built quite a few relationships just because I love people. And the thing that I had dedicated the majority of my time to was supporting things and places wherever the kids were. So I was active in the Frisco community. I'd done PTA volunteerism. I've sat on the Frisco Education Foundation board. I participated in the Planning and Evaluation Committee for the $694 million bond. I was wherever the kids were, anything Frisco related, I was volunteering and contributing. This week is the Mindbender STEAM Camp offered by Frisco Education Foundation. So I had volunteered during the week where my son attended because it was half day. It didn't make sense to try to get to Dallas and get back. So being an active member of the community became a valuable tool to me in launching my business, because I realized I had a number of connections already that I didn't even know would be useful later.
And that kind of goes full circle to when you previously talked about how service was important to you. Service is fantastic, right? It allows us to give back to our communities.
Yes.
It allows us to fulfill what I believe is a responsibility, right? You don't just live somewhere and take. You got to give back.
Exactly.
But in doing so, it gives back to you, right? You develop these relationships.
Yes.
You have the ability to maybe even go do things that most others wouldn't be able to go do. But I think it enriches all of us when you give back because you develop those relationships. And who are you developing those relationships with? Other people that are giving back.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think that's such a huge part of being in any business, right? And then especially for those who are running or are in leadership is, hey, set that example and go give back to the community.
That is exactly it. And I didn't understand the circle when I was just a parent who was volunteering and wanting to give back and wanting to contribute to where my kids were taking from. So if they needed, an extra volunteer here, an extra volunteer worker there, I was doing those things. But then on the flip side, learning that the business community in Frisco revolved around the city and the chamber. So becoming a member of Frisco Chamber of Commerce and Plano Chamber of Commerce and finding out who's doing business in our community and who are they doing business with, learning the business landscape is another entry point.
And I think too, especially in your circumstance, is you were giving back for years before you ever, looked at that effort and said, hey, I would appreciate some support here from this community. And I think that's huge because it shows your heart, right? And anytime you approach developing relationships with a heart of, how can I help you? It makes it so much easier. You're going to build deeper relationships. And I can't tell you how many networking things we go to. We've talked about this on other podcasts where you always run into the people who are, hey, I'm so-and-so, I do this, please buy from me or come visit me or whatever. And those people, I just smile and I shake their hand. And in my head, I'm just shaking my head, right? Because that's just, it's so inauthentic.
Yeah.
And so as you've built DMX Consulting, how do you try to show your authenticity through everything that you do?
I do it through, that's exactly it, by being authentic. I don't want to just be in business. I want to see how I can serve you. And if serving you means identifying someone who can do something for you that I cannot, it doesn't mean taking your business. It means referring you to someone else. It means introducing you to someone like you thought you needed my service, what you actually need is. So during the exploratory phase and the consultations, my rest comes from at night very peaceful when I know I'm not just out here to get money by any means necessary. I want to work with you if you're the one who I can best help. But if not, I find a tremendous amount of satisfaction in being able to tell you who can. So I joined Junior League of Collin County, so probably 5 or 6 years in, and they train volunteers. So lending my service to train other women who want to volunteer in the community for free. So being a member of Junior League of Collin County, I didn't know, my business is only 3 years old, that is 6 years old. I didn't know that even that was a part of contributing to the community and giving. I was a part of the nonprofit excellence. I was doing monthly workshops for Junior League to help nonprofits. Nonprofits are mission-focused organizations that want to help people, and I was volunteering my time and my expertise to help them do that in a better way. So if nothing else, you may have already seen me or you knew about me and you just knew me as a volunteer and a giver, not as someone who's begging for business. So I try to be authentic in that I think that if I'm offering to help, I'm really offering to help, not just for a buck.
That's right. And I think that goes towards that abundance mindset, right? Hey, if I can't help you, I'm going to get you to somebody who can, and there's plenty of business out there for me.
Exactly.
All right, so tell us about DMX Consulting. What all do you offer and what services do you provide?
So DMX Consulting, of course, like I said, stands for Demand Excellence to Achieve Success. And I believe success has 2 pillars: clear expectations and the enforced accountability of those expectations, like we do with our kids. First, I'm going to tell you what I expect. I expect A's. If not B's, and that means you tried. If you tell me that a C is all you can get and you studied and you went in there with your full effort, then I'm going to accept that. So excellence and success doesn't necessarily mean the top or the best, but definitely the best effort and the right amount of input. So clear expectations and then the enforced accountability of those expectations. So I trademarked what I call the DEED. another play on my name, DEE, and then government, of course, my full background, document, document, document. So the design, education, execution, and documentation is my registered trademark of the deed, which is a sustainable process, just like we talked about change management and communication, listening, monitoring, and adjusting based on what you've observed. So this is how I help you achieve your success through the deed. So I talk when I get public speaking gigs, performance management, your deed to success. How are you going to design those expectations and that accountability? First, the education comes through the communication. We talked about that extensively, but change just keeps happening. So being able to address that change while you're executing and then documenting and then doing it all over again. So I just focus on performance management, the training and the coaching to get that, and then the public speaking that people want to hear more about what I'm doing and where I'm from, and they invite me to talk about it.
And you're a fantastic speaker. And I also don't think I've ever talked to a human resource professional that didn't use the word documentation at some point during the conversation.
Then if they don't, you know that they're a fraud.
That's right. That's right. Where did you get your certifications from over there? I didn't hear the word documentation.
HR is all about documentation. Every performance review, every raise, every promotion, even when you select and accept the position, the offer letter is a form of documentation. So documentation and communication, I think, are the pillars for anything that deals with people and processes.
All right. And if someone wants to reach out to DMX Consulting, where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me on my website at Dee Maddox Consulting. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at DMX Consulting. You can find me on LinkedIn, my favorite platform, as DMX Consulting as well.
All right. So we are out of time, but I always finish up with a few questions.
Sure.
Favorite books?
Ooh. So we already named two of them. I just finished Who Not How, Who Moved My Cheese. Mm-hmm. And then for all of that change that we've talked about, it begins with changing your mindset and your habits, and Atomic Habits by James Clear. So those are my three top hits.
I think Atomic Habits has been on the bestseller list for 3 years now. I mean, it's something ridiculous.
It should be. Yeah. One of the key takeaways that I talk about is simplify, eliminate, automate. And when you're talking about change and you're improving processes, those are the three things that the book drives home. But the behavioral mindset of how it takes, we talk about 21 days to build a habit. No, it's about committing to the habit and stacking the habits and attaching it to behaviors, the cue and the crave and the response and the reward, all the things that really drive the change forward is a good habit building.
Awesome. All right. What about podcasts? Are you a podcast listener?
So I am now getting into podcasts because I was not a big social media user of podcasts. So when I found out about yours, Driven to Succeed is another one that I've been listening to because I got them when I was searching for this one. That one popped up, which was already one that I had. The Driven Crowd, Driven to Succeed is another one. And then my girlfriend has one called You Deserve to Love Your Job. Which I agree.
Oh, interesting.
We're talking about strengths. So yeah, I'm just getting into podcasts. So some people have been into it for years, but you also have to know that I wasn't even on Facebook prior to 2021. So I really was not doing anything that I did for people to know that I was doing it. But now I'm trying to be more attached to technology and podcasts.
It's amazing how that transition happens when you start your own business.
Exactly.
All right. Final question. What's your favorite movie?
Ooh, I will not lie. It is You've Got Mail.
You've Got Mail. All right.
You've Got Mail.
All right. Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan.
Yes.
Fantastic. Dee, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in. And don't forget, Aussie Grind is a show sponsor. So if you are in the Frisco area, right off Preston Road, go check them out. Fantastic coffee shop, amazing food. And the owners are pretty amazing too. You can check them out on, I don't know the episode number, but they are on the Driven Crowd podcast. So have a fantastic time and we'll see you next time.